William banned Tom Parker Bowles from Windsor Castle. But the decision that sealed it wasn't William's alone. Princess Anne, the monarchy's most uncompromising enforcer, didn't object. She endorsed it. At least, that's what everyone thought was impossible inside a family still navigating Camilla's place in the crown. Tom Parker Bowles is Camilla's son from her first marriage. Food critic, author, publicly charming. He was never given a royal title. He once joked the public would storm the palace gates if he were made a prince. That joke reveals everything. He knew his access was tolerated, not guaranteed, and never truly his to assume. How does someone go from beloved palace insider to quietly expelled outsider? The answer begins with William and the new architecture of power he has been building since Charles's health battles forced the monarchy to confront its own vulnerability. Since Charles began stepping back from certain duties, William has assumed more operational control than any public announcement has acknowledged. He attends briefings that once belonged exclusively to the king. He weighs in on residence protocols, on access decisions, on the quiet administrative machinery that keeps the institution functioning. This is not ceremonial. This is real power, exercised in real time. And William is protective, fiercely protective, not just of the crown as a symbol, but of its hierarchies and boundaries. He draws a hard line between those who carry royal blood and those who benefit from proximity to it. That distinction matters enormously to him, more than politeness, more than family harmony. Camilla's children have always occupied an awkward middle space inside that framework, present at royal events, photographed near royal residences, treated publicly as extensions of the family without ever being formally part of it. And that wasn't even the part that got people angry. What got people angry, what got William's attention, was the assumption. The slow creep of entitlement that comes when access goes unchallenged long enough that it starts to feel like ownership. William watched that creep. He tracked it, and his patience began running out in measurable increments. Read that again. William is not reacting impulsively. He is executing a deliberate recalibration of who belongs inside the walls and who merely believes they do. And this next part is the one that even Tom's supporters couldn't defend. Because the behavior that triggered William's decision wasn't a single misstep. It was a pattern that had been building quietly for some time in spaces that carry the full weight of the crown. Tom Parker Bowles would look back on this moment and wish he'd made a different call. Someone saw it coming. Those close to William's inner circle understood the tolerance for this ambiguity had an expiration date. Nobody listened. And now the door is closed. Picture a room inside a royal residence, not a private sitting room, but a space that carries institutional gravity. Every gathering held within Windsor Castle's walls is implicitly an act conducted under the Crown's authority. That is not sentiment. That is protocol, centuries deep, with no flexibility built in for personal convenience. Reports point to an unauthorized use of a royal residence, an event held without proper clearance, without the institutional approval that every single gathering in those spaces requires. Windsor Castle is not a backdrop for personal ambitions. It is not a venue to be borrowed because your mother happens to be married to the king. Every room in that building carries the weight of the crown, and using it without authorization is not a social faux pas. It is a breach of the institutional framework that holds the monarchy together. Tom allegedly hosted a gala-style event that crossed the line between private guest and entitled occupant. The distinction William makes between those two categories is absolute. A private guest operates within the permissions granted to them. An entitled occupant behaves as though those permissions are permanent, transferable, and self-authorizing. Tom crossed that line. And once you cross it in William's world, there is no graceful walk back. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Sources close to the situation make that clear. This was a pattern of behavior, incremental, cumulative, and increasingly difficult to ignore. Each individual instance might have been explained away in isolation, but patterns do not lie, And William is a man who reads patterns with the precision of someone who has spent his entire life watching the monarchy manage exactly this kind of boundary erosion. When it reached William's desk, the decision was swift and non-negotiable. No committee, no extended deliberation, no diplomatic softening. The order came from the top of the next generation, and it was executed with the quiet efficiency that the palace reserves for its most serious internal corrections. The door closed, and it did not open again. There is a particular kind of authority that comes not from volume but from stillness. Princess Anne has built an entire career on that principle. She does not perform her convictions. She enforces them. And when William moved against Tom Parker Bowles, Anne's response was not silence born of indifference. It was silence born of agreement. This is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Because Anne's approval is not a minor footnote. It is a seismic signal about the internal politics of the senior royal family. Anne has never been warm toward Camilla's integration into the family structure. Her loyalty is to the institution, to the crown as an entity that exists beyond any individual, beyond any marriage, beyond any step-family arrangement negotiated in the wake of scandal. Anne has spent decades as the monarchy's enforcer of standards. She is the royal who shows up, does the work, and expects everyone around her to do the same. She does not bend rules for sentiment. She does not make exceptions for proximity. And she has never pretended to embrace Camilla's world as an extension of her own. When William made his move, Anne had every opportunity to push back. She could have counseled patience. She could have argued for a softer approach. She did neither. Her approval, expressed through the most powerful currency in royal politics, which is informed silence, aligned her squarely with William's decision. 2 generations of the monarchy, standing on the same side of the same line. Anne recognized a threat to the institution's integrity and backed the response without hesitation. That is not a small thing. That is a declaration, a quiet, immovable, thoroughly royal declaration that the standards she has spent her life defending are now being inherited by the next generation, and that she approves of the heir who is inheriting them. The crown's enforcer just handed the next king her endorsement. And that changes the entire landscape of what comes next. Camilla Parker Bowles spent decades being the most despised woman in Britain. She fought through public contempt, through Diana's shadow, through years of being treated as an illegitimate presence in a family that did not want her. Her coronation as Queen Consort was a hard-won moment, the culmination of a long, painful, politically complicated journey toward acceptance. Her children were never part of that deal. The agreement the palace made with the public, the implicit contract that allowed Camilla's acceptance, was built around Camilla alone. Tom and Laura exist in royal orbit, not royal structure. They carry no official designation, no formal role, no institutional standing. They are there because their mother is there, and that was always a conditional arrangement. This expulsion is a direct message to Camilla, delivered in the language she understands better than anyone: institutional action. Your past does not get a permanent room in our future. The life you built before Charles, the children you raised in a different world, they do not automatically inherit the access your position has created. Access is not hereditary. Privilege is not transferable. And William has just made that point with the kind of clarity that requires no press release. In the weeks ahead, Camilla would understand exactly what this meant. She cannot publicly defend Tom without undermining her own carefully maintained position. Any statement of maternal solidarity risks reopening every question about where her loyalties lie with the family she married into or the family she came from. The palace has already answered that question on her behalf. She is caught between mother and queen, and the institution has made clear which role takes precedence inside these walls. Camilla remains, but her footing is less certain than it has ever been since the crown was placed on her head. There is a version of this story that is purely administrative: unauthorized access, protocol breach, institutional correction. that version is accurate. It is also incomplete. Because William did not grow up in a policy document. He grew up watching his parents' marriage collapse in real time, with Camilla's affair with Charles as the fault line running through everything. He watched his mother become the most publicly humiliated woman in Britain. He watched Diana fight for dignity inside a system that had already decided she was inconvenient. He was 12 years old when his parents separated. He was 15 when his mother died. He has been publicly gracious about Camilla, gracious in a way that a man who understands institutional necessity is gracious, measured, controlled, and entirely intentional. But grace is not forgiveness, and forgiveness is not trust. Those are three separate things, and William has never confused them. Every time Camilla's family benefits from royal access, every event, every residence, every borrowed piece of the institution his family built, it lands somewhere specific inside William. Not as a tantrum, not as open hostility, as a quiet, accumulating accounting of what was taken from Diana and what is now being assumed by people who contributed to that loss. Dry understatement to say this is complicated. So yeah, not great, because William is now the one holding the keys. He is the one who decides who walks through the door and who does not. He has the authority, the position, and, critically, the motivation to use both. This expulsion is not just administrative. It is personal, historical, and deeply intentional. It is William drawing a line in a place where lines have been blurred for too long, using the one tool that the palace has always used most effectively: quiet, decisive, irreversible action. For a while, things actually seemed fine. Tom moved through royal spaces without incident, and the arrangement held. That didn't last. Most people never heard about this part. The quiet reorganization happening inside the palace, the methodical redrawing of boundaries that William has been executing since he stepped into greater operational authority, has not generated headlines. It has generated results. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern in motion, and it is accelerating. Tom Parker Bowles is not the first person to find a door closing, and the architecture of what William is building suggests he will not be the last. The circle is tightening. The criteria for who belongs inside the palace's operational orbit are being rewritten in real time, and the author is a future king who has very clear ideas about what the institution requires. Anne's alignment with William is the most significant signal in this entire story. Because Anne does not align casually. She does not lend her implicit approval to moves she has reservations about. When she stands behind a decision, she stands behind it completely. And her backing of William's action suggests something larger than a single expulsion. It suggests a coalition. A generational and ideological alignment between two of the monarchy's most serious figures, both committed to the same vision of what the crown must protect. The palace is being reorganized. Quietly, firmly, without public announcement and without apology. The peripheral figures who accumulated access during the long, complicated transition of Charles's reign are now being evaluated against a new standard, William's standard, and that standard is significantly less tolerant of the ambiguity that allowed people like Tom Parker Bowles to treat royal spaces as personal amenities. The question is not whether this pattern will continue. The question is who stands in its path next. And that answer is already being written inside walls that do not speak to the press. A monarchy that cannot police its own boundaries does not survive. That is not an opinion. It is the lesson written across every royal institution that has collapsed under the weight of its own exceptions. William understands this with the clarity of someone who has studied the crown's vulnerabilities as carefully as its strengths. Allowing extended family members to treat royal residences as personal property is not a small thing. It is corrosive. It erodes the distinction between the institution and the individuals orbiting it. It creates precedents that are almost impossible to walk back once they are established. And it sends a message to everyone watching, inside the palace and outside it, that access is negotiable, that protocol is flexible, and that the Crown's authority over its own spaces is subject to personal relationships. William is refusing to send that message. This move signals to every peripheral royal figure, every extended family member, every spouse's relative, every person who has accumulated access through proximity rather than position, that proximity to power is not the same as power. That distinction is now being enforced, and enforced visibly enough that no one inside the palace can claim they didn't understand the new terms. Anne's generation built the firewall. They did it through decades of discipline, institutional loyalty, and the willingness to make uncomfortable decisions in service of the Crown's long-term survival. William's generation is now reinforcing that firewall, updating it, extending it, and applying it to a new set of circumstances that Anne's generation could not have fully anticipated. The Crown is not a family business. It is a living institution with obligations that extend far beyond any individual's personal relationships or family arrangements. William is its next custodian, and he is already governing like it. Pay attention to this next detail, because it explains everything. Tom Parker Bowles did not leave Windsor Castle under the weight of a public scandal. There were no leaked photographs, no explosive interviews, no dramatic confrontation captured by a waiting press corps. He left because William decided he would leave, and that decision was executed with the quiet, absolute authority of someone who no longer needs to justify his choices to anyone inside those walls. William acted. Anne approved. The palace moved on without a press release, without a spokesperson's statement, without any of the institutional machinery that gets deployed when the Crown wants to manage a narrative. This was not narrative management. This was a directive, clean, final, and unmistakably clear to everyone who received it. Then a source close to the family came forward with what they revealed, that this had been building for longer than anyone publicly acknowledged, and that William's decision was not reactive but deliberate, the culmination of a sustained period of observation and assessment. If you're wondering how that's even legal, so is everyone else, because the power William exercised here operates in a space that exists entirely outside public accountability. The palace makes its own rules inside its own walls. Camilla remains queen consort. She retains her title, her position, her carefully constructed public role. But her footing is less certain than it has ever been. The expulsion of her son is a permanent marker in the landscape of her relationship with William, a reminder that her position was granted, not inherited, and that the terms of that grant are subject to revision. Tom Parker Bowles had very little time before the consequence landed, and the clock had already started. The Crown chose institution over individual. William's Britain is being decided behind closed doors.